Random thoughts. This is going to be the last video about the book, The First Steps in East Africa Exploration of RR by Richard Burton. And I'm going to read the part where he tells us about the aftermath of the attack that happened on them while they were in Berbera. And then, of course, then we are done with the book. Now, in the previous video, we read where he tells us about the escape of Speck. He was captured, tied, beaten up, hurt, but then he runs away, and there are people who are sent to capture him. They find him, but instead of taking him back, they help him get into the ship, which I found to be very confusing. And I think you'll agree with me that the story is not complete. There's something that was happening that Richard Burton doesn't tell us about his relationship with the people who were attacked. Of course, he does tell us that many of them, or some of the people who attacked the camp, were their friends. And I don't know what happened there. Now, he continues to say, now we are reading what happens after the attack. They are already on the ship. Speck has escaped. And in fact, they carried everyone. Basically, I'm not sure that everybody was carried. Maybe there were more deaths, of course, especially of the non-British members of the team. And I don't think Richard Burton was interested in getting those on board if they were dead. Maybe he did. I don't think he does say that. Now, let's read what he says. When the three survivors had reached the craft, Yusuf, the captain, armed his men with muskets and spears, landed them near the camp, and ascertained that the enemy, expecting a fresh attack, had fled, carrying away our clothes, tobacco, swords, and other weapons. The corpse of Lieutenant Stroyan was then brought on board. Our lamented comrade was already stuck and cold. A spear had transfixed his heart, and another had speared his abdomen, and a frightened gash, apparently of a sword, had opened the upper part of his forehead. The body had been bruised with war clubs, and thighs showed marks of violence after death. This was the severest affliction that befell us. We had lived together like brothers. Lieutenant Stroyan was a universal favorite, and his sterling qualities of manly courage and physical endurance and steady perseverance had augured for him a bright career, thus prematurely cut off. So basically mourning the death of Stroyan and saying how great an officer he was and all that. Truly melancholy to us was the contrast between the evening when he sat with us full of life and the spirits, and the morning when we saw amongst us a livid corpse. So, of course, it's death. That's what happens. We had hoped to preserve the remains of our friends for internment at Aden, but so rapid were the effects of exposure that we were compelled most reluctantly on the morning of the 20th April to commit them to the deep. Lieutenant Henry reading the funeral service. So they wanted to carry Stroyan all the way to Aden, but they could not. It's hot, and you cannot keep a body for a journey like that. And they decided they were going to bury him in the sea, and that's what they did. Then, with heavy hearts, we set sail for the near Arabian shore, and after tedious 2 days, carried to our friends the news of an unexpected disaster. So finally, after 2 days, they reached Aden, and they, of course, brief their seniors about what happened. And yeah, so that's the end of that book. And I will encourage you to find the book and read it for yourself. Whatever you have read in these videos is maybe like 10-20% of what you will find in the book. So I'll request you to find, or I'll recommend that you find the book and read the book. And I will say that, of course, this is a source it's a British source, and is, of course, biased and all that. And I know there are people who are like, we should not read documents done by colonial British, but I'm like, maybe it's important for us to read these documents so that we understand what happened. And by understanding what happened, then we are going to be prepared and avoid similar stuff happening. But if we are going to be like, oh, we don't want to read them, then we'll remain ignorant, and that's not a good place to be. And now the next book is, of course, I've mentioned it before, is the so-called Mad Mullah, and it's a book I'll start reading and creating videos about, and hopefully that book is going to be very interesting. Is a biography, sort of, written in the 1920s, and we're going to learn a lot about who he was. Of course, it's another source by a British. Of course, there are biases, and we are going to go, of course, to see how to overcome those. Those are my random thoughts.